Well, if you know anything about the novel Mouse, you know that this video is going to be a lot more serious than the last one. For those of you that don't know about it, the author Art Spiegelman interviewed his father, Vladek Spiegelman, a Holocaust survivor, and drew out his story using animals to depict different groups of people. Most notably using mice to represent Jews, cats to represent Germans, and pigs to represent Poles. So why am I talking about a book on the Holocaust? This is really not the kind of thing you'd expect from this channel. Earlier last month, the school board in Tennessee decided to ban Mouse. They stated their reasons as the book's use of graphic imagery, nudity, and crude language. I'll come back to this stuff later. For now, I just want to talk about the book. See, I had known about the book prior to this whole banning incident, I just never got around to reading it. Well, after that whole incident happened, that was the push I needed to read the book. So about a week ago, after I got let off of work, I drove to my local bookstore to try and find a copy. I went to the graphic novel section since it is a graphic novel. I was going back and forth for a good long while, and I couldn't find it. So I went to the manga section just to make sure it hadn't been put there by mistake, and I couldn't find it there either. This whole incident lasted about maybe 30 minutes, and then eventually I had to ask an employee to help me find the book. And after looking through their system, we found it. Turns out I was looking in the wrong section. This book was not in the graphic novel section because it had been placed in the world history section. I don't know, just hearing that, it's kind of the bombshell. I needed to know that this book was important. Well, at least I thought so, because I ended up writing that statement on my whiteboard. So this book has two narratives to it. First narrative is set in present times, with Art interviewing Vladek about the Holocaust, and the second narrative is Vladek's tale of what he went through during the Holocaust. I'm going to try and refrain from talking about the plot as much as possible, because I truly believe you should read this book. I'm going to take the sleeve off so it doesn't make as much noise when I'm waving it around. And in all honesty, I like this cover a lot better than the other one. Before I even start talking about the plot, I just want to talk about the art in this book. I found the art on the end sheets alone haunting. So I spent 2 days reading this book, and I was completely sucked into it with all the hardships that Vladek had to endure. Not just during Auschwitz, but just the moments leading up to it when the Nazis are slowly enforcing their final plan on the Jews. I also like the stuff in the present part of the book, the parts where it's talking about Art's strained relationship with his father. I also like the parts where the author goes into detail on how much guilt he feels, because he feels like he's had a much easier life than compared to the one that his parents had to endure. I love the way that he drew himself as a small child when he goes to his therapist, and he talks about how he feels when he compares himself to his father. I respect how Art Spiegelman didn't shy away from writing his father in the novel. He's an incredibly stubborn, angry old man that's hard to get along with. I think a detail in the novel that I really liked was how Art talked about how hard it was going to be to write his father in the book, because his father is just a walking stereotype of the angry Jewish old man. His father is so Jewish in this novel that I actually read all of his lines in Hank's Jewish father-in-law's voice from King of the Hill. I know that doesn't sound like much of a compliment, but let me explain that it's pretty hard for me to hear another person's voice in my head when I'm reading a character's lines in a book, and in this, it happened flawlessly with the stuff his father says. A great example when I talk about on how unfiltered he portrays his father in this is there's a part in the present to where him, his wife, and his father are all driving through the countryside, and they pick up a black hitchhiker. Vladek opposes this, but they pick him up anyway, and then after they get done dropping him off, Vladek makes a racist comment towards the man, and that's when the author's wife turns to him and says, "How can you, of all people, after what you went through, be racist towards another human being?" That's just exactly what the Nazis did to the Jews. And all he has to say to this, after all he's been through, is, you can't compare Jews to the blacks. So yeah, I give Art Spiegelman huge praise for how unfiltered he talks about his father and how he tells his story. And speaking of unfiltered, yes, this is a Holocaust book. Sure, I've read plenty of graphic material before, like Berserk, but stuff like that pales in comparison to this, because the stuff you read about in this actually happened. And you're hearing about it through somebody who had to witness it firsthand. There's a part that stands out to me a lot. It's whenever they're being marched in the snow by the Nazis, and then Vladek recalls on how when he was a small child, his neighbors had to shoot their dog because it went rabid. He talked about how the dog rolled around and kicked before it finally died. He then mentions on how amazing it is that a human being makes similar movements and noises when the same thing happens to it. Another horrifying moment happens earlier on in the book when the Jews are being evacuated out of the ghettos by the Nazis, and the children won't stop crying. So a Nazi grabs the children by the legs and swings them into a brick wall. And all Vladik has to say about this is that they stopped making noise after that. I know in the book it shows a cartoon cat doing this, but if you're like me, you're removing this filter of cartoon animals in your head and you're imagining having to see this firsthand from Vladik's perspective. Speaking of cartoon animals, a thing I really liked about the book is that whenever Vladik would try to go undercover and act like he's not Jewish and just Polish, it would show him wearing a mask of a pig. Or during the present, whenever Art's talking about how he feels about writing the book and how he's turning down all these offers to write a show or make a movie, just shows him wearing a mask of a mouse. I like the detail he goes into how much the trauma of the Holocaust meant to him, even though he didn't go through it. One incident of trauma he talks about is that whenever he was a child, when he would go to take a shower, he would have a fear that sometimes Zyklon gas would come out instead of water. And that's all I'm going to say regarding the book. Now we're going to get back to the issue of it being banned in Tennessee schools. I actually read the transcript that the school board released regarding the banning of the book, them talking about the gruesome imagery, the nudity, and the crude language used in the novel. Now let me talk about the issue of nudity specifically. I can actually single out the specific incident they are talking about. The part they're talking about regarding nudity doesn't even relate to the Holocaust. It actually involves the author's mother. I'm actually going to read the script for this part. There's a section in the book where Vladik finds an old comic that Art wrote. It talks about his mother's suicide and how it affected him and his father. It shows her being found in the bathtub after she killed herself. Yes, it's graphic, and it does show nudity. But here's the thing. It plays an important part in the story. Vladik never read any of Art's comics, but he decided to read this one, and it brought back memories of her and allowed him to talk more about their time during the Holocaust. I am of the firm belief that there is nothing wrong with showing nudity in your material as long as there's nothing sexual about it. A lot of other countries think this way, and it's just another thing that America is far behind on. But besides my opinion on that, let me talk about my experiences regarding learning the Holocaust around the same time period children are going to be at whenever they're going to be exposed to this book. See, when I was in middle school, we didn't read Mouse. We read Night by Elie Wiesel, and that's also a really good book, and I recommend you read that one. After we got done reading that book, then they showed us images from the Holocaust. Images of the camps and images of the prisoners and what they wore. They also showed us photos of the atrocities that these people had to undergo. One of the atrocities that they showed us were photos of mass burial pits to where they dumped bodies into them. And yes, these bodies were naked. It was an incredibly haunting image, and I remember it to this day. So, in comparison to what I went through during my time of learning about the Holocaust, I'm pretty sure children can handle seeing a drawing of a breast. Also, as far as the use of profanity, what they say is that they feel like students are going to read this in the books, and then they're just going to repeat it outside of class. Okay, this is just me winging it here, but do you not know how kids talk? Do you not know how teenagers talk? I'm talking like 12 and up. The age group of 12 to 16 swears more than any other age group out there. Your student's vocabulary is a lot more vulgar than you think it is. Not to mention when I was in school, we read plenty of books that had swearing in it. You know what they did? They pulled us aside and said, this language is not okay to use outside of class, but it is important for the story we are reading. And we understood that. Look, with how easy it is for kids to get access to stuff nowadays, they're already exposed to this kind of language on a daily basis, mainly from the entertainment they consume, and honestly, I have no problem with that. I used to watch Family Guy and shit when I was 9. So the way I see it, if your children are going to be exposed to this language, at least let them be exposed to it in a format they can learn from. Like, I'm 22 years old, and I probably know a lot more about the Holocaust than your average middle schooler and high schooler does. And I've never read this book, and after all the stuff I already know, and reading it, I want to know even more now. I actually plan on taking a trip to my local Holocaust exhibit very soon, and that's an experience I wouldn't get if I hadn't read this book. And I feel like by banning this book, you're possibly denying your students a similar experience. So yeah, I'm a little irritated about this whole book banning thing. And I'm not the only one. This book has been the top seller on Amazon for a good while now. And there's been stories I've been reading online on how certain comic book shops and other bookstores are wanting to ship out copies to students in Tennessee that are wanting to read it. So yeah, whenever you try to ban a book, you usually get more people reading it than before. You certainly got me reading it, and plenty of other people now. Now I hope I can get other people to read it by posting this video. I've already gotten one of my friends to read it, and I can't wait to hear what he says whenever he gets done reading it. You know, after all the backlash this is getting and how more people are reading the book now than ever, maybe the people down in Tennessee will revert their decision of banning this book and... No, great, now they're burning books. Never change, Tennessee. Never change.